It was a cold October evening in 1989, the kind where the wind whistles through the trees and the last rays of sunlight vanish behind the hills. The Johnson farmhouse sat alone on a dirt road, miles from the nearest neighbor, surrounded by fields that stretched into darkness. The family inside seemed ordinary at first glance. Parents Martha and Richard Johnson, along with their 5 children, laughing, playing, and preparing for dinner. But that ordinary night would turn into the most terrifying moment the small town had ever seen. Neighbors later recalled the storm rolling in that night, rain tapping violently against the windows, and flashes of lightning cutting across the sky. Some remembered hearing a sudden scream in the distance, muffled by the roar of thunder. Others reported seeing a car speeding away from the farmhouse at an unusually fast pace, its headlights disappearing into the blackness. Yet when anyone tried to investigate, there was nothing, no footprints, no signs of struggle, nothing but the locked doors of the farmhouse standing silently in the storm. Inside the house, the scene was even stranger. The dinner table sat untouched, meals still steaming on the plates. Toys were scattered across the living room, books lay open on the floor, and beds were rumpled as if the children had simply vanished mid-play. Family pets wandered the halls aimlessly, meowing or whimpering as if sensing the sudden absence of the children. Martha and Richard reported checking every room, every closet, every corner. But the children were gone, leaving behind only an eerie silence. Local police arrived hours later, responding to frantic 911 calls from neighbors. Investigators were puzzled immediately. The doors and windows were all locked from the inside, and no forced entry was found. It was as though the children had simply disappeared into thin air. Search parties scoured the surrounding fields, the nearby woods, and even the creek that ran behind the property. But there was no trace of the 5 kids, no footprints, no broken branches, nothing. The more the investigators looked, the more baffling the disappearance became. Rumors spread through the town like wildfire. Some whispered that the children had been taken by strangers, while others claimed something far darker had occurred. A few neighbors even spoke of a mysterious figure they had seen lurking near the farm that evening, a shadowy man who vanished as quickly as he appeared. But no one had been able to identify him, and no leads panned out. The farmhouse, once the heart of the Johnson family's life, became a symbol of fear, mystery, and the unknown, standing silently as the first chapter of a decades-long enigma. The morning after the disappearance, the entire town was on edge. Police officers arrived at the Johnson farmhouse with flashlights cutting through the early fog, cameras in hand, and dogs trained to track scents. Every corner of the property was meticulously searched. The barn, once bustling with chores and animals, was silent and empty. Fields surrounding the farmhouse were scoured for footprints, tire tracks, or any sign of struggle, but the storm had washed away all traces. Even the creek that meandered behind the property, a likely escape route, revealed nothing. It was as if the children had vanished into thin air. Investigators began interviewing the family first. Martha and Richard were in shock, their eyes hollow, replaying the night over and over in their minds. They described hearing nothing unusual before the storm, nothing that would hint at an impending danger. But under pressure, one small detail emerged. A stranger had been seen wandering near the farmhouse in the days leading up to the disappearance. A neighbor had noticed a man asking odd questions about the children, watching them play from a distance. But by the time the police followed up, the man had vanished without a trace. Detectives expanded their investigation to the neighbors and surrounding areas. Friends and relatives were questioned extensively. Did anyone see a suspicious vehicle? Did anyone hear screaming? Every lead seemed to hit a dead end. Even the local sheriff admitted that it was one of the most baffling cases he had ever encountered. The children's rooms were examined again, looking for hidden notes, signs of forced removal, or anything unusual, but nothing concrete turned up. All that remained were empty beds and a silence that weighed heavily over the farmhouse. Forensic teams were called in, though in 1989, their resources were limited. Fingerprints, fibers, and trace evidence were collected, but none pointed to a suspect. Even the family pets were examined, but they offered no clues. The sense of unease grew stronger with every passing day. Locals began to speculate about the why as much as the how. Some whispered about abduction by outsiders, others feared that something darker, something almost supernatural, might have occurred. In a town so small, everyone knew everyone, but no one could explain how 5 children could disappear from a farmhouse with no forced entry. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The case drew attention from state authorities and even made headlines in local newspapers, but leads ran cold quickly. Search parties had covered every inch of farmland, woods, and nearby creeks. Volunteers combed the surrounding forests tirelessly, calling the children's names, but their voices returned only echoes. Each failed attempt to find the missing children added a layer of frustration and fear. Slowly, the investigation seemed to hit a wall, leaving the community haunted by the sudden, inexplicable absence of the Johnson children. As the years passed, the Johnson farmhouse transformed from a place of family life into a symbol of fear and mystery. Locals rarely spoke about it openly, but whispers traveled through the town like wind through the trees. Some said the house was cursed, claiming that those who stepped inside felt an inexplicable chill, as if unseen eyes were watching. Children were warned to stay away, and even the bravest teenagers avoided it at night. Every creaking floorboard or gust of wind seemed to fuel the legend of what had happened there on that stormy night in 1989. Stories began to multiply, each one darker than the last. A few townspeople claimed to see shadowy figures in the windows long after the children vanished. Others reported hearing laughter, footsteps, or the faint cry of a child carried on the wind when the moon was full. Travelers passing by would sometimes swear the farmhouse seemed alive, lights flickering inside even when no one was there, doors opening and closing on their own. These accounts, though impossible to verify, spread quickly, embedding themselves into local folklore. Over time, conspiracy theories started to take hold. Some believed the children had been kidnapped by outsiders, possibly for ransom or some sinister purpose. Others whispered about darker forces, rituals, curses, or supernatural involvement, though most dismissed these as hysteria. Yet the lack of evidence only seemed to validate the fear. Every unexplained sound, every shadow in the corner of the eye, every detail that didn't fit the normal world, was added to the ever-growing mythology surrounding the farmhouse. Even the physical property changed with time, mirroring the town's unease. Windows were boarded up, paint peeled from the walls, and the roof sagged under decades of neglect. The fields, once full of crops and life, became overgrown with weeds and brambles. Travelers avoided the road at night, convinced the house was a place where something terrible lingered. But despite the decay, people continued to feel its presence, an oppressive weight of secrets that refused to be ignored. Those who dared enter often left with stories of strange markings, mysterious scratches, and a sense of being watched, even when alone. As the 1990s turned into the 2000s, the story of the vanished children reached beyond the town. Journalists occasionally ran features on the farmhouse, local historians included it in books about unexplained mysteries, and online forums began discussing it in hushed tones. Though decades had passed, the legend refused to die. The memory of that stormy night in 1989, the children who disappeared without a trace, and the house that seemed to harbor its own secrets, lingered in the minds of all who heard the tale, waiting for the next twist, the next revelation that might finally explain the unexplainable. Decades had passed, and the Johnson farmhouse had long been abandoned, its broken windows staring blankly into the overgrown fields. Most people had assumed the story of the vanished children would remain a mystery forever. But in 2024, the FBI reopened the cold case, armed with modern forensic technology that was simply unavailable in 1989. The tiniest trace of evidence, once invisible, could now be amplified, analyzed, and interpreted. For the first time in 35 years, hope mingled with dread as investigators approached the long-forgotten farmhouse. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a tip from a retired local who had kept a decades-old recording, forgotten in a drawer. The tape was labeled ambiguously, simply Johnson Farm, October 89. Audio experts carefully enhanced the recording, filtering out static and storm sounds. What emerged was chilling, muffled voices, footsteps pacing across the wooden floor, and faint cries of distress that no one could ignore. The audio hinted at the presence of someone, or something, lurking in the house that night. The experts were stunned. This tape could finally illuminate what had remained hidden for generations. With this clue in hand, the FBI returned to the farmhouse. Every corner of the property was scanned with advanced imaging equipment and ground-penetrating radar. Layers of debris and soil that had accumulated over decades were carefully removed, revealing anomalies beneath the house itself. The investigators discovered a section of the floor that appeared recently disturbed, even though it had been covered in dust for years. Suspense gripped the team as they realized they might be standing above something the children, or someone, had left behind all those years ago. Inside the farmhouse, the tension was palpable. FBI agents moved cautiously, their flashlights cutting through the thick shadows. Every creak of the old floorboards seemed amplified, echoing like a warning. The walls, once mundane and faded, now seemed oppressive, covered with decades of grime, scratches, and faint markings that no one had noticed before. As the team descended to a hidden section beneath the floorboards, they felt the weight of decades of unanswered questions pressing down on them. What they would find next could finally bring the story of the vanished children into the light, or plunge it into an even darker mystery. The hidden space beneath the house was small, cramped, and cloaked in darkness. Dust swirled in the beam of flashlights, and the faint smell of decay lingered in the air. Inside, investigators found fragments of toys, scattered drawings, and small items that seemed impossibly out of place for the decades they had lain there. Even before testing, the team knew this room held direct evidence of the children who had disappeared so long ago. But the real horror was only beginning to surface, a truth buried in shadows and secrets that would shock the nation once revealed. Beneath the decaying floorboards, the FBI discovered a narrow staircase that had been carefully concealed, leading down into a basement no one had ever known existed. The air was thick and musty, carrying the scent of damp wood and decay. As agents descended, their flashlights revealed walls lined with decades of grime and cobwebs, every corner seemingly whispering secrets long forgotten. Dust floated in the air, disturbed by their footsteps, and for a moment, it felt as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting to reveal its horrors. The basement was far from ordinary. Old toys were scattered across the floor, torn dolls, toy trucks with missing wheels, and coloring books filled with childish sketches, frozen in time. Faded photographs of the children were tucked into corners, their eyes eerily lifelike even after 35 years. They were scraps of clothing and blankets, neatly folded yet covered in layers of dust, as if someone had left in a hurry and intended to return. The sheer presence of these items was enough to send chills down the spines of the FBI team. As the agents explored further, they noticed markings etched into the walls, symbols and strange designs, faded but unmistakable. Some appeared ritualistic, geometric shapes that repeated in a deliberate pattern. Others were more disturbing, scratch marks and handprints, as if someone had clawed at the walls in terror or desperation. The sight of these walls suggested a horrifying possibility that went beyond abduction, an intentional confinement designed to trap, manipulate, and terrify. Every new detail seemed to amplify the darkness that had lain dormant in the farmhouse for decades. Among the scattered objects, investigators found small journals and notes, yellowed with age, written in a messy, frantic hand. The entries referenced the children by name, describing their routines, likes, and even fears. Some pages contained obsessive instructions on how to keep them safe, while others hinted at sinister intentions. It was as though the person responsible had chronicled their untwisted sense of control, documenting every detail for reasons no one could fully understand. The journals made it painfully clear that this basement had not been forgotten. It had been used intentionally as a private, hidden world for a very dark purpose. The atmosphere in the basement was suffocating. Every item, every marking, and every trace of the children painted a picture of fear and confinement. Agents reported an uncanny sensation, as if the weight of decades of suffering clung to the walls themselves. Even the seasoned FBI team, trained to handle the worst cases imaginable, felt a deep, instinctive unease. It was clear that this basement held answers, but the horrifying nature of those answers would shake the investigators, and eventually the entire nation, to its core. As investigators sifted through the basement evidence, their attention turned to a figure that had long evaded suspicion: the Johnson family's longtime neighbor, a man who had been friendly and seemingly harmless to the community. In the years following the children's disappearance, he had quietly moved away, leaving the town behind, and for decades, no one had known his whereabouts. But his name surfaced repeatedly in old police files, interviews, and now in the journals found in the basement. The evidence was beginning to paint a chilling picture. Someone familiar, someone trusted, had orchestrated the unthinkable. The FBI uncovered his personal journals, diaries, and letters hidden in a storage unit he had maintained nearby. The pages were filled with disturbing obsessions and meticulous planning, detailing the children's schedules, habits, and behaviors. He wrote about watching them play, taking mental notes, and imagining ways to protect them from the outside world. But the protective tone quickly twisted into something dark, obsessive, and controlling. Every line revealed a mind consumed by fixation, a man who had blurred the lines between care and captivity to terrifying extremes. Maps were discovered tucked into the journals, detailed drawings of the Johnson farmhouse and the surrounding land. Each map pinpointed locations within the property, windows, entrances, and even the hidden basement. Some pages were annotated with cryptic symbols, corresponding eerily with the markings found on the basement walls. Investigators realized that this man had not only planned the children's disappearance but had also studied the house in exacting detail, turning it into a carefully constructed trap. His obsession had persisted for years, meticulously hidden behind a facade of normalcy. Interviews with old neighbors revealed small, unsettling memories that had seemed insignificant at the time. People recalled seeing him lurking near the farmhouse, watching the children for hours, sometimes speaking to them in ways that felt unsettling but went unnoticed. Some had even noticed him pacing the property on stormy nights, disappearing as mysteriously as he appeared. At the time, no one could have imagined the horror lurking beneath the calm demeanor of a neighbor who had earned the community's trust. The realization struck investigators like a thunderclap. The man they were seeking had been hiding in plain sight for decades. Finally, forensic analysis connected the dots. DNA samples from the basement matched traces of the missing children, and fibers from his clothing were found in hidden nooks of the farmhouse. The evidence left no room for doubt. He had been directly involved in their disappearance and had maintained a secret that had gone undetected for 35 years. The community's sense of betrayal deepened. Someone familiar, someone trusted, had orchestrated a nightmare. The shocking truth, once uncovered, began to unravel a story that had haunted the town for generations, exposing the darkness hiding behind the mask of a friendly neighbor. The moment the FBI made the discovery public in 2024, the story of the vanished Johnson children spread like wildfire across the country. News outlets ran non-stop coverage, with headlines screaming about the decades-old mystery finally coming to light. Social media erupted with shocked reactions, theories, and speculation. People couldn't believe that 5 children had been trapped in a hidden basement for years, right under the noses of a small town that had considered their neighbor trustworthy. For many, the revelations were more than horrifying, they were unthinkable. Journalists and documentarians rushed to the farmhouse, cameras capturing the boarded-up windows and the overgrown yard that had long been the backdrop for whispers and ghost stories. Townspeople, some still living nearby, gave interviews recounting their memories of that stormy night in 1989. Many admitted they had sensed something off, but never could have imagined the full extent of the horror. The story struck a chord nationwide, tapping into fears that anyone, even someone who seemed familiar, could hide something unimaginable for decades. As forensic details emerged, the nation grappled with the magnitude of the crime. DNA evidence confirmed the children's presence in the basement, while fibers, markings, and journals painted a chilling portrait of obsession and cruelty. Experts weighed in on the case, describing it as one of the most disturbing discoveries of the century. Psychologists, criminologists, and true crime enthusiasts dissected every detail, debating how the neighbor could have concealed such a dark secret for so long. Meanwhile, families across the country were left horrified, questioning the safety of their own neighborhoods and the people they trusted most. The FBI's revelation also reignited conversations about cold cases and the advances in forensic technology that finally brought clarity to decades-old mysteries. Citizens marveled at how modern science could uncover the truth long hidden, while simultaneously shivering at the sheer malevolence of what had occurred. Podcasts, documentaries, and online forums exploded with discussion, each retelling amplifying the suspense and horror of the story. The vanished children, once forgotten by time, had suddenly become a symbol of vigilance, fear, and the unrelenting quest for justice. Even now, years after the discovery, the farmhouse continues to haunt the imaginations of all who hear its story. Abandoned and silent, it stands as a monument to a nightmare that played out in plain sight. Scholars, investigators, and curious travelers visit the area, but the house offers no easy answers. The memory of the vanished children, the hidden basement, and the obsessed neighbor lingers like a shadow over the town, leaving everyone who hears the tale with the chilling realization that some mysteries, no matter how long buried, refuse to die quietly. As the sun sets over the abandoned farmhouse, its shadow stretching across the overgrown fields, one question still hangs in the air. How many secrets remain hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to be uncovered? The vanished children of 1989 are finally remembered, their story brought into the light, but the darkness that allowed it to happen still lingers. The farmhouse stands silent, yet its walls seem to whisper warnings to anyone who dares to listen. The Johnson children may never fully return, and the horrors of the past may never be completely understood, but their story serves as a chilling reminder. Evil can hide behind the most ordinary faces, and truth, no matter how long buried, has a way of emerging. As the wind howls through the broken windows and the night closes in, one thing is certain. Some mysteries leave scars that last forever, and some shadows are never truly gone. So, the next time you walk past a quiet house on a rural road, or hear the creak of a floorboard in the dead of night, remember the farmhouse where 5 children vanished, and the dark secret that shocked an entire nation decades later. The story of the Johnson children may have ended, but the echoes of that night still haunt the silence, and the questions remain, unanswered, chilling, and ever-present.
If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so the next secret finds you first.